In this next tutorial, we're going to look at not how to place lights necessarily in the level, but how to create blueprints on where we can actually move those lights around. So far, we've looked at static meshes, landscapes, and foliage objects, and now finally as well, light objects that we can place in our level. What we want to actually start looking now is blueprints. Blueprints in Unreal are simply scripts that are used to turn all of these elements and put them together in order to make our levels interactive. For example, if I wanted to have a streetlight that would turn on, rather than place the streetlight mesh in, the street lamp, and then have a trigger box in here, we're going to create that object in here so that we can duplicate it across this road. To do that, I'm going to first create a folder, which I will call Interactives. You don't have to call it that, but it is useful to start organizing our content browser so it doesn't start spiraling out of control. In here, I will right click and go Blueprint Class. There are many different blueprint classes that you can choose from that allow us to have AI and NPC as well as our own character. But for now, we're just going to start with actor, as this is an object that can be placed or spawned into the world. We're going to name it BP underscore street light. And I'm going to left click and place it into the level. As you can see, there is nothing in it for us to be able to see it from different. All that is in there at the moment is a scene empty. If we double click it, it will open up our blueprint window. To give you a bit of a tour around this map, here we can see the components, all the things that we need as ingredients for this particular interactive object, the variables down here, which are our measurements and our ways of exchanging data between those objects, and over here our details plane as well. The two things that we're going to be using the most are going to be viewport and event graph. Here in event graph, similar to our materials node, we're able to move in, roll our mouse wheel up to zoom in and out, left click and drag to select multiple objects, and right click to find different functions. This event graph will be used in order to trigger certain events and make things happen in our blueprint. But first, let's go back to our viewport. The first thing or component that we're going to need in this is going to be a static mesh. I can search for it here and select it just here. There are two static meshes that I want to look at here. If we type in street light, you'll notice that there is a street light that is off and a street light that is on. What we're going to do for our very first interactive element is have a script that detects when the player is close and switches this from either on to off. But to do that, we'll need another component in here, and that is a trigger box. In this case, a box collision. This box collision allows us to be able to see how close the player can get before they can interact with this object. I'm going to resize this out quite large in order to make this easier. You want to do this when you first begin, and then make it smaller as you need to once you know that the object is working. In here, I'm going to delete these and look at all the events that I can call with this particular component. If you are new and don't know all of these functions by heart, what I would recommend is selecting the object and scrolling down to the bottom and seeing what objects and events we can actually call. In this case, the one that is going to be most useful for you when you begin is on component begin overlap. What this means is that when something overlaps with this component, something will happen. If I click here to add, you'll notice I now have this red box, which is an event. Events will generally be triggered by circumstances happening in the level that will allow us to move from one function to the next and take these output pips and plug them into different functions. In this case, we want to check to see if our actor, when it crosses over here, can then change the intensity of the point light. Or, in this case, to just set the static mesh from light on to light off. Back in here, if I left click and drag, I can select my character. It's important to know what type of character we have. In this case, I am using a third person character, the default character in here, so I already know the name of that character. But just to demonstrate, if I left click and drag this character into the level to get a sense of scale, I can now see that character's name is BP third person character. So now, if I select my blueprint, which as we can see is now spawning the static mesh and box, I can now left click and drag out of here and then type in BP underscore third person character. And I can see up here cast2. Cast2 allows one blueprint object to talk to another. There are many different ways that blueprints can communicate with each other, some better than others. But when you're first starting, this is an acceptable way for us to be able to learn how to use blueprints. Now that it is casting there, we're going to set up a test. It's important to be able to make sure that as you're doing these programs, you can set up tests along the way to be able to see if something is working the way we expect it to. This test is going to be called print string. What this will do is in the top left hand corner, when we are playing our level, it will display whatever text we tell it to select here. In this case, we're going to say street light on. Now, when we go into that part of the level and walk into there, we should see in the top left-hand corner, the words street light on slowly appear and then fade. Now that we know that works, we can now ask it to do something more complicated. Again, if you're not familiar with any of the things in here, you can simply drag them in here, then left click and drag off of them to search for all the things that you can do for it. In this case, I want to set the static mesh as it is here. If I left click and drag out of here and type in static mesh, I can scroll down until I find set static mesh. From here, I can select whichever static mesh I want. In this case, lights, street light on. Then plug it into here. If I go back now to static mesh and switch that to street light without the words on it, I'll see that there is no light in there, and then there will be a light. In order to test this more accurately, I'm actually going to find my player start and move it closer towards the function that I am testing. And as I move closer to it, you can see the light turns on. But now we want the light to turn off when we move away. To do that, I'm simply going to go back into that blueprint, click on my box, and scroll down until I see the next one down there that says on component end overlap. I click plus, and I can do the exact same features that I have done here, except this time change the values around so that the light turns off. In this case, I will move this down here, plug this into target, and then turn this to street light off. Compile. And compile to test, save, and then press play to test this function out. I walk into it, the light turns on, and I walk away from it, the light turns off. This is good, but as we can see, it is just a bit of an illusion, given that there is no actual light being emitted from this location. To fix that, I can simply now go here to add components and type in point light. And now that that is there selected, I can move that into the world. It's important when you're doing this, I find, to make sure that you're also keeping an eye on the world that you're creating these variables for. After all, it's this world we want it to light, not this vacuum that we are in right now. So as we can see, that is a very strong point light. And it's also the wrong color. I'm going to click here and select something closer to the warm yellow color that the light itself should be emitting. I'm also going to move it a little bit higher off the ground. Here we can start to see that it's casting the shadows from inside the lantern. If these shadows are a little bit too dramatic, I can always switch them off. However, we will keep them on for now. Just like before though, we need to make sure that this light only comes on once the player is close by. I click on the light and I look here at its intensity, which is currently set at 5000. I'm going to remember that number and then change it to 0. Now I'm going to go back to my event graph, and after it has set the static mesh, I am then going to get the point light and set intensity. From here I will plug in the executor line and change the value of the float to 5000. And then simply copy that and paste it below and then change that back to 0, meaning that when the character collides with this box, it will set the static mesh and then change the settings of our point light. Now, when I walk up, not only does this light go on, but it also casts a shadow. But what if I wanted to make sure that this light only comes on if I press a button? To do that, we're going to go back here and we're going to change some of the settings here. We only want to be able to press the on button when we're close by. So by holding down Alt, I'm going to left click on these executive lines. I'm then going to left click and drag these down below. I'm then going to enable input. With the input enabled, you'll see that target is to self, which we want to keep that way, but it's asking for a player controller. A player controller is something that controls any of the players that are spawned in the level. In this case, we want it to be the first character, as this is not a multiplayer game. So we're going to be typing in here, get player controller, and we're going to leave it as 0, as this will be the first character that's spawned in. I'm then going to left click and drag out of here, and then type in disable input, and hook it up to here. I'll need to move this out to plug it here, not the target, because the target should still be the street light itself. Now down here, I need to be able to set a different trigger that's going to be able to allow us to turn our light on. I'm going to right click here and then type in E and then space key, and then search down until I see this icon here. Here, as you can see, I can make any key an event that can trigger something in the level. But here's a problem. I go here to select press and switch it on. But now, if I press it again, it's only going to do one of these functions. So I need to introduce a different flow in here. We're going to use a flip-flop. Flip-flop is a very technical term for press it once and it does one event, and then press it again and it will do another event. With that put in place, I'm now going to press play, and as I walk up to this and press E, and then press E again, it turns off. The good thing about using blueprints in this manner is I can now actually move this wherever I want in the level, as well as duplicate it around the level as well. So now, as I get closer to this house, the lights will start to appear, and what this will do is guide our player to the correct location. This is a very basic but very small start into the world of blueprints, and it's important for you to now understand that while this might be basic, it will form the fundamentals of your understanding, and it's best to start off with the basics first and then build up to more complicated blueprints as you go. Take this time now to decorate your level out and experiment with how this adjusts the lighting and mood of your level.